Hello students. In this module, I'll be talking about the pollen-pistil interaction part 1. So look, listen and learn. Just look on my left. What just happened? A pollen just landed on the stigma, right? And after landing, it will start germinating on the stigma. Is that right? So that's a pollen grain and it has just landed on the stigma. So to start, we can say that all the events from the deposition of the pollen grain on the stigma, we are not complete yet. Let's see why. So what will happen next is this pollen grain will now start germinating and produce a pollen tube which will directly enter the ovule. Is that okay? So that's a pollen tube and it has entered the ovule carrying the male gametes. So we can say that all the events from the deposition of the pollen on the stigma to the entry of the pollen tube into the ovule is called as pollen-pistil interaction, right? You must know that pollen-pistil interaction is a very dynamic process which involves recognition of the pollen on the stigma followed by either promotion or inhibition of the germination of the pollen grain. Now let us see how this can be accomplished. So let's imagine in the environment there are two types of flowers. The ones in red, I'm going to call them as species 1, and the one in the right is called as species 2. Is that okay? Now what happens in nature is cross-pollination happens by chance, by any agent. And when that happens, you should know that the pollen from both species 1 as well as species 2 can start flying off and start landing on this flower in the center which still belongs to species 1. Is that okay? So randomly the right type as well as the wrong type of pollen can all come and land on the stigma. So I can say that the left one is the right pollen and the right one is the wrong pollen. Now this structure right here in the center, which is called as pistil or gynoecium, has the ability to recognize the right from the wrong. So the pistil, if it recognizes the pollen being right, it will accept the pollen and promote the germination of the pollen tube, and this event will lead to fertilization. But if the stigma thinks that the pollen is wrong, then it will reject the pollen and prevent the germination of pollen in the stigma, or it can also prevent the growth of the pollen tube in the style. Is that okay? So if you see up here, the wrong pollens will simply be rejected. Is that okay? Because the pistil can recognize the right pollen. And once the pistil has recognized the right pollen or the compatible pollen, what will happen? It will promote or allow the germination of the pollen on the stigma. Is that okay? And what will happen? There will be a formation of a pollen tube. And even the contents of the pollen grain will follow in the pollen tube. And what are the contents of the pollen tube? They are going to be the tube nucleus, you know that one, followed by the 2 haploid male gametes. They will also follow into the pollen tube in the stigma. Is that okay? Moving on. Now you know that in most plants, in most angiosperms, the pollen grain is released on the stigma in the 2-cell stage. Is that okay? Now remember, the larger cell here is called as the vegetative cell, and the smaller cell which floats in the vegetative cell is also called as the generative cell. The vegetative cell is also called as the tube cell. We know that. Now what will happen once the pollen starts germinating? The vegetative nucleus, the tube nucleus, will go inside the pollen tube, right? What you have here is the pollen tube which has now just moved into the style of the pistil. Is it okay? Right? And this pollen tube basically contains what? The tube nucleus. It also contains thin cytoplasm, and this generative cell, remember, will divide to produce 2 haploid male gametes which will follow the tube nucleus into the pollen tube. Is that okay? And now the pollen is called as a 3-celled pollen. Is it okay? And this is the first part of the pollen-pistil interaction. In the next module, I'll be talking about the second part of the pollen-pistil interaction. Till then, thank you and take care.